Hello, and welcome to Life with God, a podcast where we explore key ideas in God through conversations with students and expert guests. In Season 4, our focus is on the concept of beauty, and our guest in Episode 7 is Ante Jerončić, Professor of Ethics and Theology and Chair of the Department of Theology and Christian Philosophy at Andrews Theological Seminary in Berry Springs, Michigan. We're also joined in this conversation by J. Fiath Reeves, Kayla Goodman, Scott Linton, and Ingrid Dumitrescu. Before the discussion, we will spend 5 minutes learning a few things about our guest. What is a memorable childhood tradition?
A memorable childhood tradition. Well, I would say going skiing with the family because I was growing up close to the Austrian Alps, so we loved skiing a lot.
Wow, that's super cool. So to piggyback off that question, what is a life lesson or proverb that has stuck with you from your family of origin or from your country of origin?
Well, a lesson that stuck with me, let me think about it. It's a good question. I would say that, well, if you work hard, you will succeed. That's one of the lessons I had coming from a family of engineers and hardworking people. So they certainly instilled that in me.
Are you a tea or a coffee person?
I love tea. Yes. All kinds of tea. I love tea.
If you could have one last meal, what would it be?
The Napolitana pizza I like to make at home.
And I will piggyback off his question. What is your favorite dish at potlucks?
Favorite dish at potlucks? Anything that's not haystacks. I don't like haystacks, I'm sorry.
If you were something in nature, what would you be?
Tree.
And why?
They're sublime, they're beautiful, they're deep, they're ancient, they're wise. I love them.
Wow. So when you were growing up, elementary school, middle school, what did you want to be?
Initially an engineer. And then when I became an Adventist, that changed later.
What's your favorite animal?
Owl.
What are some of your hobbies that you like to do other than skiing?
I love skiing. I love reading music. I like walking in nature. Anything in nature is for me transformative. So I love being in nature as much as possible. And cold exposure. I like cold baths. That's my hobby.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What brought you joy during the pandemic?
A time to simplify life and go back to what's really essential and what really matters in many ways.
Could you introduce your family to us?
My family, yes, I have a wife, Debbie, and a daughter, Elizabeth, who is a sophomore in the academy here.
Is there a place that you've been that you think most people, if not everyone, should go?
Croatia. It's beautiful. Croatia is really beautiful. So yeah, it's just beautiful islands, beautiful coast. Yes.
What book has impacted you the most besides the Bible?
It's impossible to answer because the impact came in different seasons of life and spoke to me in different ways. But let me just pick one. I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Discipleship really shaped me profoundly when I was a young Christian.
What do you love most about Jesus?
His love and compassion.
What is a goal for the future?
To be able to live out my values more consistently and more authentically.
How did God come through to you at your lowest?
the realization that God can handle all my anger, that he has seen this many times before, and that he's not intimidated by my blaming him, and that he's able to forgive all of that and help me.
What's your least favorite food? Like, just no, please, it's not good, other than haystack.
Mushrooms. Absolutely, yes, mushrooms.
Are you an ocean or a mountains person?
Even though I grew up on a coastline, I think I'm a mountains person. I love mountains.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit of what you currently do now as your profession.
Well, right now I'm teaching mostly in ethics and theology and some philosophy as well. I'm also the chair of the department. So that's on that side. I really enjoy this. I'm a part of a very good team of people. So it's a pleasure to work there. And I'm also involved in different writing projects and that, but mostly I am committed to teaching and being the chair.
Who had the most influence on your faith?
Apart from my mom, who has been incredibly influential, it was my aunt who first became an Adventist, and we became really Adventists through her influence.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Ante, for sharing, and of course for all the questions. Our topic today for discussion is God's beauty, and the approach we're going to take is one of theology and ethics. So I'm going to open up with this question: How can theology and ethics help us see, discover, understand God's beauty?
Well, I think the question can also be turned around. How can beauty help us understand ethics and theology in some ways? Okay. But I would say that, and we will certainly have opportunity to a little bit unpack what do we mean by beauty after all, especially in a Christian context, and when it comes to us as moral agents, as those who act in the world. But I would say that there are two primary versions of and understandings of beauty in the New Testament and Old Testament. One has to do with, glory and splendor, usually associated with God and God's creation. But the second meaning of beauty really has to do with moral goodness, right? God is beautiful because he's morally good. And we often see that when people act in a way that is morally laudable, coherent, inspiring, that we are immediately attracted to that. We find goodness attractive. So one of the most important lessons we see in the Bible and teachings in the Bible, not just in the Bible, but also in the history of philosophy, is that people have emphasized the overlap of beauty and goodness. As a matter of fact, recently, Ellen Scarry wrote a book on beauty and justice, and she made some fantastic comparisons between how beauty opens us up to justice, because beauty is about transcending ourselves and all of that. But in any case, this is one way in which I would think that when we Christians, when we talk about beauty of moral agents, we are talking about basically moral goodness. And this is one important connection that we have here.
As a non-Christian, do you think that they still have the same idea of beauty if they don't have that vision of God?
That's the thing, right? I would not say perhaps same vision, but there might be more overlaps in experience, because many people would admit that beauty pulls them out of themselves, right? If you have a beautiful concert, a beautiful painting, or a beautiful mountain, the last thing that you think, oh, how awesome I am, see how moved I am by this mountain. There's a kind of self-forgetfulness involved in any aesthetic experience. So it's already going outside of yourself. So that's one type of transcendence that's taking place, self-transcendence. You go beyond yourself. But many people would also point to the inexhaustibility of aesthetic experiences. There's some depth to there. People sense some awe, some sense of greatness, something that they cannot quite comprehend, especially when we talk about sublime, which is kind of more this awesomeness of beauty, right, in terms of mountains and all of that. So I think that the fact that there is this something more in aesthetic experiences, which C.S. Lewis, by the way, said all of these are echoes of Eden, right, because God is the creator of the true, the good, and the beautiful. So any encounter with the beautiful, if it is not marred in some evil, is some sort of far removed, but is some sort of contact with God. Now, does it necessarily mean that people will become Christians? No, but can we point to the fact that even those aesthetic experiences have some depth to them, that they're rooted in the being of God and the act of creation? We could use this actually as an apologetic moment and actually point people to God as a source of everything that's beautiful. So yeah, not perhaps in concept, therefore, but certainly in experience, I would say.
When you're dealing with terms like theology, ethics, I mean, I think for some people, it can be very abstract. It can be very like, okay, that's a department or that's a thing over there. And even beauty could seem abstract, but how do I apply that to my life? Like, what does it look like in my day-to-day, and why is it important for my day-to-day?
Right. But it's very, very happy that you're asking this, because it is precisely the application of faith that led me to ethics. Certainly, ethics deals with a lot of particular specific problems that we are facing as individuals and as society, right? Very complicated problems. So ethics deals with that. But first and foremost, the reason why I'm interested in ethics is because ethics is about bringing thought and belief to life, right? Ethics precisely asks, okay, we say that Jesus died on the cross. What does it mean for the way we interpret the world, for the way we interpret existence, for the way we think about justice, for the way we think about interpersonal relationships? So it is this what aboutness, right? What about faith? That is the primary impulse of ethics. And by the way, I would say the one way that I would say that ethics is not really a special domain that we do sometimes. I think all of our lives, as Henry David Thoreau once noted, all of our exist in the world, and he writes about this, that our lives are startlingly moral. Think about it. In this day, there's no way you will end this day unless you're some recluse, but even then perhaps not, where you will not face an ethical decision. The way you relate to others, what you say, when you say, how you say it, truthfully or not truthfully, harshly or not harshly, partially or not partially, all of these things, we are constantly saturated in these moral decisions that we need to make, and they impact all domains of life. So I would say that precisely focusing on ethics means to precisely focus on the concreteness of human existence, and that's why I'm so deeply interested in this field.
Quick follow-up on something that you said earlier about God, and that one of the things that really demonstrates that there is beauty with God is the fact that he is morally good. What about those instances in life, or even as people encounter the Bible, where right now they're really not experiencing God's morally good or moral goodness? How can we continue to see beauty in those moments?
Well, that would be the prime temptation, wouldn't it be, right? The temptation that we have to fight against with our utmost power. If you look, for instance, let's say if you look Psalm 73, it begins with the most important statement any Jew and any Christian, I can say, and that is the statement that God is good to Israel. Right? That is the most fundamental foundation of faith. This is basically later on what John will say, that God is light and in him there is no darkness. That's what it means. But then Asaph continues the psalm and he says, well, but my feet almost slipped, right? And he almost let go of that. And that is the temptation. That is the temptation that we allow, and this is normal, that it's not judgmental, it's just how we are just but dust. But we do allow very often that circumstances define for us who God is. And then we become essentially idolaters, right? Whenever we define any experience or anything else to define God, rather than God letting be defined through the goodness and mercy of Jesus Christ, we are basically substituting the God for a no God. Now, this is normal. It happened to me many times in life. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but that in essence, this is what it amounts to. So when we are tempted to let go of the goodness of God, we are finding ourselves at the heart of the great controversy, at the base of the heart of the claim that God is not benevolently disposed towards us, which was essentially the claim that the serpent made in Genesis 3. Right? All this kind of beauty of Eden, everything that you see around there. Oh, no, this is just subterfuge. It's a ruse. God wants to keep you in prison. God wants to prevent you from really fully realizing your existence, from becoming fully self-actualized. So if you do this act that I'm telling you, you will become full, right? Because God doesn't want you fullness. God doesn't want you to completely have this. So what you're referring to is precisely the heart of all the struggles that we have, the deepest existential struggles, and also the struggles of the great controversy. So we need to hold firm and not let those things define God for us. So that's how I would approach that.
How do you choose to like maintain that mindset? Like, it's easy to get off track. So what are some key things that you think people can use to stay on track and focusing on the beauty of God through the terrors of the world?
Yeah, I think that also coming back, right, to the definition of beauty, and we are here now going, I mean, there are many different definitions of beauty through history, right? We have this kind of, we can talk even about like how people have conceived beauty, but generally people have defined beauty in terms of certain properties, right? Such as, I don't know, proportion of parts, splendor, and you have this kind of great theory of beauty that is developing in antiquity and then kind of being challenged later on in the modern times. So beauty becomes more subjective. But for Christians, right, again, beauty primarily has to do with the moral goodness of God, with benevolence. And there are many thinkers who have developed this in a powerful way, like Jonathan Edwards, probably the greatest American theologian, took beauty to be not one of the attributes of God, but the primary attribute of God. And perhaps we can come back later why he said this, because I think it's absolutely essential. But to answer your question, if beauty is the primary attribute of God, and the primary manifestation of beauty in moral agents, we are moral agents, God is a moral, those people who act, as in a way, who have agency, in other words, that the beauty of moral agents is benevolence and self-giving love. Therefore, the greatest manifestation of beauty is the crucifixion of Jesus and the death of Jesus on the cross, which is paradoxical, right? That the place of greatest ugliness and the grace of torture and the seeming abandonment of God is actually the greatest manifestation of beauty, because beauty is the self-giving love of God, right? So that's the paradox right there. So I think the greatest way in which we can meditate and indwell and be suffused with the beauty of God is simply to meditate in the story of Jesus and all these acts of forgiveness and compassion and benevolence, which are the primary manifestations of his moral goodness and therefore of beauty. Him touching the leper is an act of beauty. Him forgiving the woman who was about to be stoned, right? That is an act of beauty. And certainly the cross of Jesus as being the primary manifestation of the beauty of God, or that's why we refer to it as cruciform beauty. I think there's much depth to that to be explored.
I mean, I know you said maybe we'll come back around to it, but I guess I kind of want to address it now. Why Jonathan Edwards' idea of beauty as God's main attribute is so important, because that's the first I'm hearing it, and I would love to hear more of what you have to say on that.
This is an excellent question. Well, here's the thing, right? When you think about beauty, there's something very interesting about beauty, right? That the moment of perception is fused with the moment of attraction, right? The moment you perceive something as beautiful, you're attracted to it, right? So it's not as if you find someone, a girl, or someone, a boy, or a piece of music or something. Oh, this is absolutely beautiful. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be attracted to it. No. the moment of perception is fused at the moment of attraction. So I think what Jonathan Edwards wanted to do, rather than present a rational argument for the existence of God, which then can be rejected, or present a moral argument for the existence of God based on morality, which I can say, oh, I don't really like that. What if people were able to perceive God as beautiful? What if the perception of beauty were the greatest apologetic you can offer to people, sorry. And so, because this is the thing, right? Because he wants the kind of knowledge of God that is not merely intellectual and that is not merely based on following certain rules, moral rules, but he wants you to fall in love with God, to see God as your lover, right? He wants you that once you say, I know God, that means that you're eminently attracted to him, right? And and that is why he emphasizes beauty. By the way, John Piper, some of you might be familiar with him, who has been profoundly influenced by Jonathan Edwards, had this famous saying defining what it means to be a Christian hedonist. He says that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him, right? God is most glorified in our deepest satisfaction in him. And one way in which we become satisfied with God is that we perceive him as attractive, as beautiful, as resplendent. And that is kind of, and it is in that perception that we can never, ever simply remain on a noetic knowledge, merely intellectual knowledge, but it involves our deepest affections and surrender and embrace. So for him, by emphasizing the beauty of God, was really a way to get a handle of what it means to have a proper knowledge of God. So aesthetics as a way to epistemology, emphasizing beauty in order to define what it means to know God.
This is very interesting. It actually anticipates one of the questions that I had in mind already, based on your earlier comment about how beauty draws us out of ourselves. And in that sense, I think it helps us connect with the world around us, with people, with nature, and so on and so forth, with God, of course. And so I was curious if you could share a bit more about what is your experience personally with beauty, especially the beauty of God? How did God draw you out of yourself to find beauty in him and connect with him? Maybe in particular times of your lives, or in particular situations.
Yeah. So I have kind of, for me, I would say that this idea that aesthetic experiences are premonitions of a different world, of a world that we have lost and the world that we hope to regain one day, a different world, for me had always had a deep spiritual experience, right? Some time ago, my wife and we were still students in Chicago, and we didn't have money, but it was my birthday, and that was my birthday gift. We went to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and listened to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which for me is just for all of us, an amazing piece of work. And I remember sitting there in the beginning of the concert, and I found the beauty of the music so painful that I started to almost like have these deep sighs, and my started hitting me in my ribs. Stop it, you're embarrassing me, right? Because I was so loud. I couldn't handle the beauty of that music at that particular moment. It was so beautiful. And later on, I realized, well, that is a reason why none of us can see God. Not only because we are morally impure, but because if we saw his beauty, our body would explode. I couldn't handle a couple of bars of a concert, barely handle it physically. Can you imagine if we saw the full glory of God? Our physical body cannot handle the encounter with that beauty, right? So we need different bodies to be able to we need to be different beings to be fully able to see the full glory of God, not just his back, right, as Moses did. So I would say for me throughout life, these aesthetic experiences, which by the way, it's very similar to what C.S. Lewis had in his encounters with joy, the longings for something more, the encounters of beauty that he had that eventually led him to become a Christian later on in life. That was very, very important to me as well. So this is more kind of encounter with beauty in a non-specifically religious system context. I can talk about religious context as well, but this is something that always points me, lifts my eyes and my mind and my heart towards God in worship and in kind of in relationship with Him.
I'd like to follow up on that, since you talked about perceiving beauty and being attracted to it. Are there boundaries or borders to this?
They absolutely are. And some of the borders are, and this is something that is worth mentioning, that actually beauty can be deeply problematic, right? In a way that, okay, let me go back, right? If you think about ancient thinkers, they referred to the three transcendentals. That's what they called, right? Three transcendentals. And they believed that there are these three things that define all being. Insofar as anything is, it has these three properties. Right? And they believe that the true and the good and the beautiful, right? Simply that is what it means to exist, means to be true, right? You're there. It means to be good if it's not damaged, and it means beautiful. Now, of course, sin damages all of that, but these are the three key ideas. Of the three, like truth is always truth, right? Truth, insofar as truth is truth, truth is something that is, well, desirable and good, right? And goodness the same. Goodness is always, well, by definition is good. But beauty can be manipulated. It can be manipulative beauty. It can be seductive beauty. It can be beauty that is being exploitative. So a lot of, actually, when you read postmodern thinkers today, there's a lot of suspicion about beauty. Beauty from kind of feminist critiques of beauty, again, is being exploitative. The kind of socio-historical location of taste, how taste is being manipulated through advertising and all of that, and beauty is being used as kind of to commodify everything and to make us spend money. So beauty can be deeply, deeply problematic. And we can actually see, and this is instructive, right? When Eve, when she picked the fruit, it says that the fruit was beautiful, on sight. So we can see, therefore, that beauty, there certainly are limits to beauty, and beauty on its own can be good and can be bad. It depends on the context. So it always has to be submitted to the criteria of truth and goodness to be properly evaluated. I don't know if that gets at your question, but certainly this is one way to think about the limits of beauty.
Thank you.
Well, now I have a follow-up on that too, because it raises questions, of course, and issues. So with Eve, we see how, maybe she was looking at the fruit and thinking, how can death, something evil, hide in something beautiful? And yet that is the experience of humanity, and we experience that also in our lives. How do we differentiate between beauty that is meant, that leads us to life versus beauty that leads us to death or destruction?
I mean, you can see, and this might sound too theological right now, but one way to approach this is to say that everything in the Bible, right, in the Old Testament, you see this in particular, has a profound covenantal structure. Like everything has spaces of freedom and the existence of limits. Like interpersonal love is absolutely amazing, but it is put within a covenantal structure where God is putting certain limits and certain expressions, right? Love is not love, right? That's not the biblical idea. There are many wrong forms of love. There is love that is adulterous, there's love, whatever, right? So love is always part, even love, even compassion, even those most important, what we would call moral virtues or spiritual qualities or aspirations that we have, such as love, compassion, empathy. And then in addition, I would say enjoyment of beauty. All of them are put within certain covenantal structure where God says, well, this you can do, but this you cannot do because it will lead to harm, to destruction and all of that. So I would say what we then say about love as being within this kind of proper limits and confinements so that it can properly flourish. The same thing can be said about beauty, right? So that beauty can fulfill its function as drawing us towards God and helping us worship him and enriching our lives. It also needs to be placed within these kind of the back and forth of the covenantal logic and reasoning that we see basically throughout the Bible being present. Yeah.
Mhm.
So today in 2022, what have you seen are our opportunities to see the beauty of God, to live out our theology and ethic? And then where does our modern society struggle with that? So I guess the positive and negative, that's unique to today.
Right. I think that certainly for us Christians, and there is for us Christians, certainly perhaps rethinking beauty and putting beauty more at the center of reflection would do us a lot of good. I think that Hans Urs von Balthasar, who probably is the most influential theologian in the 20th century who has reflected on the beauty, once made a statement that, quote, we can be sure that whoever sneers at her name or sneers at beauty or neglects beauty as if she were the ornament of a bourgeois past, or if she were a kind of outdated concept, can no longer pray and soon will no longer be able to love. And so he traces the reasons why beauty has become neglected. And for us as Christians, who are coming from a Protestant milieu that was for a long time very suspicious of the aesthetic dimension, right? Let's keep everything simple and all of that. We didn't much invest in beautiful buildings, in beautiful worship. It smells too much of Catholicism and all of this. Certainly something that we need to change. And fortunately, I think with the revival of sort of, reflecting on worship, and that's been more consistent, is one important aspect that we do. But let me speak to something else, because you're raising a very important question, and we can look through the inverse. If the language of aesthetics, right, is the language of attraction and repulsion, basically, right? You either find something attractive or you find something repulsive. You find something beautiful, you find ugly, right? And if you think about on what basis do young people leave the church? Why do people leave the church? They most likely don't leave the church because they think it's not true. It's not on the level of intellect. They might leave it perhaps sometimes because they find it too constrictive in its moral norms. But in most instances, you will see that people are leaving Adventism or leaving Christianity because they find it unattractive. They find it ugly. They find it not inspiring. Just look at the language that people have when they leave. So what we do have here is an aesthetic of unconversion, right? There's a certain aesthetics of unconversion that is taking place. And we need to be attending to these. We need to be archaeologists of these aesthetic alienations that are taking place in the lives of people, where they begin to perceive the church or God or the Bible as somehow having a whiff of some outdated past, and doing everything we can to show this attractiveness and beauty that comes in terms of coherence and promises and the flourishing of life that is being offered. All of this can have and does have a profound aesthetic dimension to it.
Do you think that we are losing out on appreciating aspects of beauty? Because like just thinking about like the aesthetic structures of the church, like I've not really seen a beautiful church in North America for Adventists, but going across overseas to Europe and seeing the cathedrals and different things, like you're just in awe of the building itself, and it inspires awe of God, I think. So what are we missing out because of that?
Yeah. Well, this has deep roots in us, and the roots are understandable, and the reason is sometimes understandable, right? We are a pilgrim people, right? We are here just for a while. Jesus coming soon at any moment. It's a faith that we profess. Whenever it happens, we still confess it in all of this. So it's understandable that the people that have seen themselves simply as nomads who are here but for a while, that they will not invest money in kind of buildings that are going to burn, but we're going to invest money in missions. And I understand that. And this is an impulse that I don't want to completely jettison. I deeply believe in, stewardship and minimalism and being prudent with the way we lose. But you're absolutely right that this sometimes has thrown things overboard that should not be overboard. And you don't need to have cathedrals to have beautiful aesthetics. You just have to have some thoughtfulness to it. And I can give you an example. If you go, for instance, if you go to Tacoma Park, and I don't know if you know, but that the old General Conference was bought by Catholics, right? There before we moved to Silver Springs, it was bought by Catholics. I forgot now. You might know, but I don't know if it's a seminary or I don't know. Some Catholic entity bought it, and they there built a beautiful chapel, which when you go in there, there's nothing in there, only white walls and perhaps a cross, like no ornamentation, but the windows, the light that is flowing in, the sense of this minimalist space that is so well thought out was for me an amazing thing. So it doesn't have to be ornamental, doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be this, but actually a kind of this kind of minimalist aesthetics that was in that building really was for me. I was floored how beautiful the chapel was. So I think that we can be certainly, and people have been more thoughtful, and certainly something that we as Adventists, as those who affirm the Creator God as the one who has created, not just moral laws, right, and health laws, but also beauty in this world, that we need to, as those who are deeply rooted in the doctrine of creation, because we celebrate the Sabbath so much. And I want to say something about Sabbath as, for me, the greatest symbol and sacrament of beauty in a moment. But we as Adventists certainly can grow in that dimension, no doubt.
Just to follow up on some of the things that you've been saying, and it's been very profound for me. I'm trying to contain or trying to retain all that you're saying. You were saying that the reason why Christians and even Adventists today are leaving is because they find it unattractive, or Christianity just seems to be ugly. But I appreciate what you're saying about the buildings, and that there needs to be intentionality in how we convey beauty even there in our setting. But I was wondering if you could speak more to how we can convey beauty that isn't ugly in not only our personal lives, but in the church.
Yeah. Well, I would say, think about, if you go back and we think about aesthetics let me go back and I will come to your question, because this is an interesting, a very interesting question, pertinent question that you're asking. And I think one way for us to get a kind of a leverage on that question and being able to answer it properly is to actually think about aesthetics, which is about the traditionally the area of philosophy that deals with value, like ethics deals with moral value, right? And aesthetics deals with questions of beauty and ugliness and the sublime and all of this. And we are sometimes tempted again, and I try to answer this in the beginning, to reduce aesthetics, okay, now we have this episode on beauty and now we talk about it and then we move on with our lives. But the same way that ethics suffuses our existence, so does aesthetics. Because think about the following aesthetic properties, right? Unified, balanced, integrated, lifeless, ingenious, dynamic, powerful, vivid, delicate, moving, graceful, elegant, and so on and so forth, right? So all of these properties, they can have a positive or negative quality. But if you think about these properties, how often do you actually encounter them in your life? All the time. Or this is powerful, and you're being attracted because the sermon is powerful and you're attracted to this, right? Or something is elegant and all of that. So then coming back to your question, so this is having an aesthetic dimension or aesthetic sensibilities isn't simply talking about beautiful buildings in Adventism, but it is also the way we portray the Christian message, right? Whether when people hear the Christian message, they can totally see how, and Ellen White is, let me finish the sentence. If you convey that Christian message, they can see how it speaks to them in a profoundly meaningful way, and they feel attraction to that. Right? And Ellen White often writes about this when she writes about, the Christian life is, the beauty and the depth, and you can see the aesthetic language she's using to describe conversion and describe genuine spirituality and the flourishing that God has in mind for us and the holistic vision of humanity that we have. All of this it has to do. So each time we present the message as powerful, each time we present it as profoundly relevant to addressing our deepest aspirations, be they for wholeness, be they for justice, be they for, whatever, right? Whenever we do this, we are actually engaging implicitly in an aesthetic exercise, but showing the relevance, and the attractiveness of the Christian message. So this was just a long-winded answer to your profound question, which meant to say that when we talk about the aesthetic dimension, we're talking again not simply about buildings, but also about the relevance. And also if you think about beauty is primarily a thing of moral goodness, then whenever you have a church in which there are no fights, but people live in a multicultural, embracing, compassionate, hospitable unity, isn't that beautiful? Isn't it profoundly attractive? So actually, when you build a church as a pastor where people love each other and serve each other, you're actually engaged in aesthetic endeavor as much as an ethical and spiritual endeavor. So that's one way of thinking about that.
So this conversation has been very interesting because we keep coming back to binaries or sort of dichotomies, and I think it opens up even more opportunities for conversation with more concepts about that. For example, the idea of superficial versus depth, because when we described, the Puritan influences upon our church, and even the influences of a long Christian church where beauty was seen more of an external thing, I think it has led us to understand beauty as something superficial that just is appearance that covers something that is a true important thing, the essence. And so the tendency then is to dismiss the appearance and to find the essence. That's one thing that I'd like to come back to, but also what you just said now, attraction, beauty is attractive at perception, in the moment of perception, but at the same time, it seems that what you're also saying is that it takes effort, that cultivating beauty takes effort. Both, all kinds of beauty take effort, really. And so there's this kind of paradox here where it's immediately perceivable by somebody else, but it takes a lot of effort. So I don't know if I can bring these two together, but just thinking of dichotomies again and how, what is our lesson from all of this? Where are we? How can we move closer to a holistic beauty, I guess?
Yes. That's an excellent question. I think in many domains of life, even when we think about, let's say, of truth, sometimes we just have these amazing epiphanies. Some just happens. There's a grace to something we perceive, something we haven't perceived. It comes out of nowhere. And it's just this sudden illuminating, totally, we haven't done anything. And suddenly we see something we haven't seen before. It's almost this kind of simply automatic awakening to an insight. But very often in life, that's not how it works. Very often insights and comprehension and understanding of depth is only to be had through a sustained craftsmanship engagement. Think about the Bible. So you might be a new believer and you open the Bible and you're just, again, smitten by some beautiful words of grace, and you just break down. In other instances, the depth of the Bible will only yield itself as a result of sustained engagement and meditation. So you might have seen this experience. You pick a passage and lets you pick it for a week. And every day you read it 3 times and you journal and you pray over it. And sometimes only after a couple of days do some cracks of deeper meaning begin to emerge. And so we have this in other, and I would say with beauty as well. Yes, very often beauty, we are just taken in by it. You don't have to be a morally good person, or you don't even have to have aesthetic sensibilities, some special sensibilities to see beauty. But in other instances, it is the cultivation of taste. It is, let's say, if you are living a very hurried life and you are, or let's say you live in a mental state, you're dealing with mental issues where you're, let's say, depressed. So the way of living, the state of your mind, the state of your heart certainly affects our perceptual apparatus and creates the world that we inhabit. So actually our mode of existence and the state we find ourselves in can actually lead us to the forgetfulness of being, to the forgetfulness of beauty that is all around us. So yes, the perception of beauty requires time, requires cultivation. When I'm hurried, when I'm completely, obsessed with something and worried about something, you put me in a beautiful park, I don't see anything, I'm completely lost. And sometimes I need to be there for half an hour, 2 hours, to slowly release all of that hold on me and begin to notice the beautiful refraction of color on the leaves of sunlight and the birds. And they were always there, I just did not notice them. So you're absolutely correct that there is this dialectic, or if you call binary, between when it comes to beauty, it's something that we are graced with, it overwhelms us, and something we need to become the kind of people who engage in practices that will enable us to perceive the depth of existence and life, which also includes beauty.
I wanted to, because you're talking about Christians and even Adventists, and I guess I wanted to ask, do you see within Adventism or the beliefs that we hold, and something that we have to add to the conversation of beauty, or a lens that we can look at theology and ethics that enhances it? And then also, where can we be more informed in our discussions?
Yeah. So this very important question, obviously, is almost like an episode in its own, and often offers many different avenues of thought. And let me just give you one way of thinking, which might be a bit more theological thinking about this. If you go back and think about at the beginning of our conversation, I referenced this idea of beauty in the Bible having a twofold component. And by the way, we have words for, Psalm 27:4 talks about gazing at the beauty of the Lord. Psalm 50 verse 2 says the perfection of beauty, Zion is the perfection of beauty. So we have always these elements of something that is connected with something that is just awesome, glorious, splendid, amazing, right? And then the second element I mentioned is this idea of beauty. Primarily, the beauty of God primarily is the goodness of God, right? That's the beauty of God. And Jonathan Edwards said that, and I tend to agree with this, right? So just bear with me because I'm answering your question. I think it's a very important question. If you go to Mark, do you remember what Jesus, when the disciples are complaining that the woman has used a perfume, right? This is in Mark chapter 14, and that she's, wasted it. And she said, in Mark, it says, leave her because she has done a beautiful thing to me. The word for beauty is kalon. The word cologne is exactly the word that Plato and all of these classical writers are using when they talk about beauty. She is so what is the beautiful thing about the act? Why is this act beautiful? Because it is an extravagance of love, right? It's goodness, moral and spiritual goodness. Leave her because she has done a beautiful thing to me. So in some word, and to answer your question would be to say, well, if beauty has to do with moral goodness, then actually the primary way in which we participate in the beauty of God is through holiness and sanctification. So suddenly sanctification, insofar it is concerned with moral and spiritual beauty, is actually it's an aesthetic category. It's not simply about mindlessly following certain laws. It's about God's act of beautifying us. And how is this beautification happening? It's not just removing your wrinkles and having a nice hairstyle, right? No. It's in the beautification. Well, who is the primary agent of this beautification? It's the Holy Spirit. So Holy Spirit is the beautifier, right? He is the beautifier of existence. And that is when you often see some old, let's say an elderly lady in the church who's completely wrinkled, and bent over, but there's a radiance of goodness coming from her heart, from her face, and you're immediately attracted to that. That's a different beauty than the external beauty that the world is emphasizing. So I think connecting, again, short your answer, connecting somehow the language of sanctification, holiness, and the wholeness that God seeks to bring about, not simply in terms of prohibitions, but in terms of this kind of language of aesthetics and beautification, is certainly something that we could explore and could actually make a lot of sense to people and make the process of holiness and sanctification more attractive. Perhaps, I don't know, but that's how I tend to think about it.
When I am in hyper-focus, as I am now in a good conversation, I lose sense of time. And it's seriously, for me, it's very hard to believe that it's been almost an hour of conversation. These concepts that you shared with us, Ante, are very deep and very insightful, and are the kind of things that we need to integrate slowly and process over time. But I'm sure they will stay with us and inform our thinking about beauty in really, and have a lot of potential for transformation, which is what we're looking for. So thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I'm very curious about the takeaways. I know they will be difficult to summarize, but let's give that a try in the next few minutes.
I think for me, I wrote down some notes, but I think for me, there were two that really stood out to me. And that was in response to one of the questions I asked, which was, there's always that temptation to pose our circumstances on God and change his beauty and make it into an idol, and something along those lines. And that was very profound, and I'm still trying to process through that entirely, because in life there's shame and guilt, which distorts our view of things. And so anyways, that was one takeaway. And then the last thing you mentioned about sanctification being the process of beautifying, that I just really enjoyed that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I think my big takeaway is, honestly, part of what you said that was like very simple but very profound to me is like those moments when you're at a beautiful place where you have to sit there longer in order to sometimes see and recognize like everything. And oftentimes I find myself rushed. And so that's one thing I want to try to apply to like remember, like, okay, like I can have this certain mindset and that can change by taking that time. So I really like that.
Thank you.
You mentioned quite a bit about how beauty can be simple but also complex, and I think that if we don't have moral principles, if we don't have certain boundaries, then it can be only chaos. But if we sit in God's beauty and take time to be with him, we can see it in a different light.
Yeah, Scott and Kayla kind of took mine, but no, but I would say the Holy Spirit being the ultimate beautifier of creation, of us. That was a very like insightful, profound comment for me. And then this idea of beauty building, beauty growing in its appreciation kind of leads me to say like, man, then that's where, you know, sanctification or the process of God growing us is an amazing thing. It's not, man, I've arrived, or, oh man, I'm not there yet. It's, I'm becoming more and more beautiful. And that's a process that I want. It's not a drudgery. It's a process I want to have in my life.
I think for me, all of the above, and also because I tend to spend much of my life in my head, I think I really was drawn to the idea of seeing beauty as something that takes me out of myself, so to speak, and connects me with the surrounding world, people, nature, and God, and other things. So as I reflect on that, I realize that by going out of myself and connecting with the surroundings, I myself am enriched in that process. And so I come back to myself with a richer meaning of everything, and that impacts the way I perceive myself and then how I offer myself to the world, so to speak. So it's a really great exchange to kind of cultivate there. And also the idea of, cultivating beauty. Yeah, beauty is attractive upon perception, in the moment of perception, and yet it takes a lot of effort to offer beauty. And so I'm just left with this, desire to put even more time and effort into cultivating a holistic beauty that for somebody else may take, you spend 20 hours working on a sermon and somebody else listens to it in an hour, but it's worth it. It's worth cultivating beauty so that when it's received, it's deep and holistic and has a great deal of meaning. So I love it. I love the conversation. Thank you so much, Ante, and everybody else, of course, for their interaction. What would be your final words for the group and for our listeners and our viewers?
Well, let me, instead of sharing some additional ideas, share with you an experience that happened to me some time ago. It happened, I have journals, so I know exactly where it happened and when it happened, but I was basically participating in a worship service. And suddenly it's hard for me to explain what this was. It was a mental image, like it was no revelation, it was nothing. It was just a mental image that suddenly came upon me. And it was an image of me finding myself in the New Jerusalem, right, in the city of God. But in a very strange way, in that image that I had, this quote unquote vision, which is ridiculous, but in that vision, I was the last one who basically managed to squeeze through the door, right? So I barely made it, kind of a thing. I know this is not, but this is in my mind, right? So there I am, squeezed against the back of the wall, and everyone is kind of taller than I am, right? And I am, and up there is Jesus, and then the martyrs and the holiest people, they're up there. But I am completely content. I don't know one to notice me. If they notice me, they may say, hey, kick him out. And okay, they wouldn't, but you know what I mean? As I'm there completely, no, just they don't realize I'm here. I'm so happy. Mm-hmm. And then silence happens. And suddenly I see these, people, right, opening a space. And I see Jesus in my mind, right, walking towards me. And I want to run. Like when you feel totally unworthy and you want to disappear, but I couldn't go away. So I fall down, and he brings me up, and that face, how I can't explain it, but the face, filled with so much joy, goodness, longing, and being moved at this moment, and grabbing me, and I wanna go away, but not letting go of me. I completely broke down that day. And interestingly, I had a similar, these experiences come to me from time to time. I have this kind of image comes back to my mind and adds additional emotional layers to the whole story. But at that moment, for the first time, I understood what it means to be loved by God in my life. And if I had to describe what it means to say that Jesus is beautiful, I cannot put it in conceptual terms. I can only point to that experience of being completely loved and embraced in a way that I've never experienced in my physical life, that transformed me from the inside out. So I cannot wait to see not only the beauty of the new earth and the beauty of New Jerusalem, but really to see the beauty of Jesus once I really see his love and goodness shown to everyone who will participate in his wedding feast. That's going to be, then we will understand for the first time what the beauty of Christ really is. So that is what I wanted to share at the end.
A heartfelt thank you to our special guests and to the student panelists for their thoughtful engagement. On behalf of our sponsor, the Adventist Theological Society, and on behalf of the Life with God team, I would like to also thank our viewers and our listeners for being here. We hope that you have learned some new and helpful insights that will transform you more into the likeness of God and empower you to become a better human being. As you can see, these conversations bring together young adults and scholars who have dedicated their lives to advancing our understanding of God, of the Bible, and of the complex human personhood. It is a unique opportunity for you to get to know these committed servant leaders and learn from them as they interact with students from around the world. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so with your presence, your comments, your prayers, and by sharing the program. If you're so inclined, you can also extend your financial support by donating to the Adventist Theological Society. To do so, go to www.atsjats.org/resources and find the Donate Now button. Make sure you also subscribe to the Adventist Theological Society YouTube channel, where you will find past and ongoing seasons. Thank you again, and I hope that you will join us next time as well.